It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. You know the drill. I'm Jeff Arbuckle. This is another Monster Mondays presented to you by Film Seizure. You can catch new episodes of Film Seizure with myself and Jason Oliver each and every Wednesday. But Mondays, well, they're for me to talk about monster movies. So we press on with this month of Godzilla in preparation for his return to the big screen. Last week, I talked about the 1964 Mothra vs. Godzilla. This week, we're going to talk about the fifth entry in the franchise, and quite frankly, probably the previous four showed a great deal more restraint than what we'd see from here on out for the rest of his first run of films. Just 8 short months after the release of Big G's battle against Mothra comes Ghidorah, the three-headed monster. This is also 100% when things get a little weird in the series. You can also say, without a doubt, the rest of the Showa era, the original era of Godzilla films, would never really turn back after this movie. You see, well, this thing starts to get real sci-fi and storylines from here on out. Sometimes an occasional Godzilla flick remains very grounded with monsters that are more legend or religious in nature or something, but really, aliens and crazy-ass plots really start to take over the series from this point forward. So here's the deal with this movie. Some scientists are looking for meteor showers. Meanwhile, a princess named Selena is headed to Japan. She's been the target of several attempts on her life for, I don't know, some reason. On her plane headed to Japan, she gets, summoned or hypnotized or something, I don't know. But a voice tells her to jump out of the plane right before a bomb destroys it. This is obviously another one of those assassination attempts. She later turns up in Japan after everyone believes her dead. She starts claiming she's possessed by Venusians. However, interestingly enough about this movie, some versions of the movie has her claim that she's actually from Mars, not Venus. So that's a thing. That happened a lot in these older movies. They got translated and released throughout the world, and they were given different titles, they're given different ideas, and so on. Anyway, she shows up in Japan without her royal garb or this bracelet that proves her lineage. She starts going to public places and starting to spout off predictions. She first says that we will hear of some catastrophes. Sure enough, when the volcano Mount Azo erupts, Rodan, who had previously been considered dead from his solo film from the 1956 movie, Rodan, that was his first appearance just a couple of years after Godzilla did, by the way. He comes out of it and starts making his existence known again. Meanwhile, the magnetic meteorite isn't a meteorite after all. These scientists have found a gigantic meteorite that struck in this area of Japan, but it turns out it's actually an egg. Inside is the fearsome Ghidorah, who once raised either Venus or Mars or whichever one, depending on which version of the movie you're watching. He hatches and begins rampaging across the countryside. Of course, Rodan runs afoul of Godzilla because pretty much everyone over the size of a fucking gigantic will do. Meanwhile, a new Mothra is hanging about. Apparently, only one of the hatched larvae from the previous movie survived. Oh my God, I just realized something. I hope one of them didn't eat the other one, but I mean, that would just be awkward to try to explain to your kids watching this movie. Although I suspect one of them ate the other one, but that's beside the point. Anyway, Mothra comes in to mediate discussion between the battling Rodan and Godzilla and hopefully enlist them in the fight against Ghidorah. They initially refuse to assist one another because they apparently fucking hate each other, and no one will ever make them believe that the other one isn't a complete asshole. Now, eventually, they do listen to their friend Mothra and decide to set aside their differences this time. They kind of side-eye each other pretty hardcore, and then work with each other to stop this golden dickwad Ghidorah, who eventually has the goddamn gall to give himself the title of king. You notice something I haven't done much in this episode? Talk hardly at all about the human storyline. Why is that? Well, it's confusing as all get out. It might be a combination of the weird space girl story and the reporter girl who's trying to use the space girl to get a huge story for the paper, and her brother who's a cop who was originally assigned to protect the princess and the scientist. I don't know, whatever. I don't know what's really going on there. This is obviously a little more geared towards children. It's got aliens with zany people and so forth. There's this whole genre of Japanese science fiction that is mostly treated like Saturday morning cartoons, where it feels like just all sorts of convoluted, crazy stuff is just thrown in with the kitchen sink. I feel like this is the movie that kind of started that trend with the Godzilla series. Anyway, as it turns out, the girl is indeed possessed by a space person thing. She eventually regains control over her consciousness thanks to her assassins being completely worthless. And oh yeah, that's the thing that's still playing out. She's a target from her uncle to be assassinated so that he can be in charge of her country or something. I don't know. Whenever a pretty princess is in danger of being assassinated by a jerk-ass uncle, I always think of the Monkeys TV show. But again, I digress. Let's get to my 3 things that I like about this movie. This is a wild movie, and not one I'd really recommend to people who aren't already into these 60s Godzilla movies. But there are still some things to like. First up, I have to say that for as bizarre as this movie is, King Ghidorah is absolutely the most endearing piece of the entire movie. Ghidorah is, without a doubt, Godzilla's main rival. He's big, he's bad, he's got laser breath, and if that's not enough, he's covered in gold scales. And if that's not enough, he's got 3 heads. He's also considerably larger than Godzilla. So whoever actually personally designed Ghidorah should be distinctly proud of their achievement. He's not just ultimately dubbed Godzilla's chief enemy, but he totally deserves the title as well. The second part that I like is the epic battle between Ghidorah, Godzilla, Mothra, and Rodan. These are all the heaviest hitters of Toho, all going at it in one giant sequence. They're also the 3 main characters that you're going to see in the new Godzilla movie coming out. It starts with Ghidorah showing up and Mothra actually taking him on first. And when Godzilla and Rodan realize that this little worm guy is pretty much brave enough to go up against this giant golden dragon, they decide to join in and start fucking him up too. While Rodan and Ghidorah fight it out in the skies, Mothra hitches a ride on Godzilla to go up the mountain. Like, seriously, Mothra has to latch on to Godzilla's tail with her mouth to be able to get up the side of the mountain. And that's just awesome. Godzilla gets up there and starts tossing boulders at Ghidorah. Finally, our 3 heroes start working together, and Rodan gives Mothra a lift. She climbs up on his back, and he flies up there, and she's like spraying him with the poison silk dust stuff. It's awesome. It's just awesome. Godzilla punches and atomic breaths Ghidorah and even holds him in place for Mothra by holding onto his tail. Finally, Godzilla tosses that bitch off a mountain, throws more boulders at him, and Ghidorah finally decides to fly back to space because these Earth monsters be cray. It's fucking awesome. Finally, one of the things that most definitely carries me through even the silliest or weirdest of Godzilla movies begins right here with this 5th film in the franchise, giving each creature a personality. Godzilla and Rodan are a couple of tough guys who are in the midst of a dick measuring contest. And, in the future, Godzilla will be seen as a hero and the leader of these monsters. One of the most iconic personality-driven moments in Godzilla's history happens in the very next movie. It's just, Ghidorah is basically either a ringer for the bad guys or the biggest, most dangerous thing ever in future movies. He's almost just a killing machine. Mothra is basically always seen as a Zen creature who can mediate and only really seems to fight when absolutely necessary. And in this movie, the battle between Godzilla and Rodan is kind of vicious. But then Mothra shows up to defuse it. And when Mothra talks to them, Godzilla cusses. And the fairies, like Mothra's little twin fairies, have to kind of like translate what's being said and scolds him for the language that he uses. It humanizes the characters. When Mothra squirts her webbing stuff onto each monster, the other laughs at what is happening to his opponent. It's one of those things that it humanizes the characters and allows Toho to create new ones like Ghidorah for these that we've gotten to know through multiple movies and have given them personalities to kind of rise up to be stars and heroes of these movies. Now, next time, we'll get into the Millennium era for one of the more serious, kind of near horror movies of the whole entire series. Forget this kitty crap. The 2000s had no time for it, man. We march into our third week with Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack, which is probably one of the longest titles in film history, but it's a movie that actually deserves and earns it. So that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. Until next week, I'll see you later. And don't forget to check out new episodes of Film Seizure each and every Wednesday and new installments of Monster Mondays each Monday on filmseizure.com, as well as check out new posts at my website, bmovieanima.com, each and every Friday.